the little girl asked on the third morning. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a bowl of cereal and a book about migratory birds, and she looked up at the woman across from her with the direct, unhurried attention she brought to every question she had decided was worth asking. "Are you and Daddy pretending?" she said. The woman's name was Vivienne Ashford. She was 33 years old, the chief executive of Ashford and Crane Capital, and she had prepared for approximately 40 different things that might happen in the first week of this arrangement. She had prepared for board members asking difficult questions. She had prepared for her cousin Edmund making a scene. She had prepared for the press. She had not prepared for a 6-year-old at a breakfast table. "What do you mean?" she said. The little girl looked at her with pale green eyes that had the specific quality of eyes that did not look away when they were thinking. "Daddy said you were friends," she said. "But you talk like you're being careful." Vivienne held the girl's gaze for a moment. Then she looked at the man across the table, at Thomas Hartwell, who was 37 years old and had a face that was doing something she could not read, and who had made it very clear, the day he had signed the agreement, that there was one condition she had not offered and he required. "I will not lie to my daughter." She had agreed, because she had not fully understood what that meant at the time. She understood now. Vivienne's grandfather had built Ashford and Crane Capital over 40 years from a 2-room brokerage into one of the 10 largest independent investment firms on the eastern seaboard. He had done it with the particular combination of intelligence and stubbornness that characterized men of his generation, men who believed that the right structure, maintained correctly, would outlast any individual. The structure he had built to outlast himself was the will. It had been drafted and redrafted over 15 years. The final version, signed 18 months before his death, contained 11 sections. The first 10 addressed the distribution of assets in the way that such documents normally did, clearly, legally, with the appropriate provisions for taxes and trusts and the management of subsidiary holdings. The 11th section was the problem. The 11th section stipulated that the controlling interest in Ashford and Crane Capital, the 63% stake that made every other decision in the firm a formality, would transfer to Vivienne Margaret Ashford on her 34th birthday, provided she was, at that time, married. If she was not married, the controlling interest would transfer instead to Edmund Ashford, her grandfather's nephew, who was 48 years old and had been circling the firm for a decade with the patience of a man who believed the future was coming to him eventually. Edmund would sell the firm. Vivienne knew this as certainly as she knew anything. He had been approached twice already by a consolidator in Boston whose business model was acquiring mid-size independents and stripping out the research and analysis teams in favor of automated platforms. Edmund had declined both times only because the controlling interest was not yet his. The moment it was, he would accept. 412 people would lose jobs they had spent years building. Vivienne's 34th birthday was in 11 weeks. She had been engaged once, at 31, to a man named Philip who had eventually made clear that he found her focus on the firm incompatible with the version of a relationship he wanted. He had not been wrong. She had not disputed it. She had simply been alone since then, and had considered this a reasonable cost of running something she cared about. Now the cost had a number attached to it, 11 weeks. She had looked at her options with the same rigor she applied to investment decisions. The legal route, contesting the 11th section on grounds of discriminatory conditional inheritance, was viable but slow. Her solicitors estimated 18 months to 3 years. She did not have 18 months. The direct route was to be married. She had contacted 3 firms that handled discrete personal arrangements of this kind. She had interviewed 6 candidates. 5 of them had wanted more than she was offering, in various currencies. The 6th had seemed reasonable until his references revealed a pattern she did not find reassuring. Thomas Hartwell had not come from any of those firms. He had come from her assistant, Margot, who had a brother who had worked construction contracts with Thomas for 2 years and had, when pressed, described him as the most straightforward person he had ever worked alongside. Vivienne had looked him up. Former architect, licensed for 8 years. His firm had been dissolved 14 months ago when the senior partner was investigated for contract fraud, nothing that touched Thomas, but enough to take the whole practice with it. He was currently working freelance, project by project, and had a 6-year-old daughter named Iris who stayed with her maternal grandmother on work days and lived with Thomas full-time every other arrangement. She had called him on a Wednesday. He had agreed to a meeting. He had listened to the full proposal without interrupting and then asked 3 questions. What were the legal parameters, what was the timeline, and what was the provision for Iris? She had answered all 3. He had taken 48 hours to give her an answer. When he called back, he said yes, with one condition. I will not lie to my daughter. She had agreed. He was not what she had expected, which was not a thought she examined too closely because it implied she had expected something specific, and she preferred not to have expectations she could not justify. He was tall, with the kind of build that came from years of physical work rather than deliberate effort. Dark hair, slightly longer than tidy. Brown eyes that were quiet and measuring. He wore clothes that were well-made and old, the specific combination of a man who had once earned good money and had maintained the things that lasted. He had a daughter named Iris. Iris was 6 years old and had her father's eyes and her own opinions on almost everything, which she delivered without preamble and expected to be taken seriously. The first morning in the apartment that Vivienne had arranged on the 15th floor of a building on Grantham Street, large enough for 2 adults and 1 child and sufficiently associated with her that its address would read correctly in any documentation, Iris had walked through every room with the systematic attention of someone taking an inventory. Then she had found the bookshelf in the living room and examined its contents with the focused interest of a child who takes books seriously. These are all workbooks, she said. Yes, Vivienne said. Don't you have any that are just for reading? Those are for reading. Iris looked at her. For reading because you want to, I mean. Not because you have to know the thing in them. Vivienne considered this. Not many, she said. Iris nodded, as if this confirmed a theory she had been developing. We'll bring some of ours, she said. Thomas, in the kitchen doorway, said nothing. But Vivienne caught something in his expression, not amusement exactly, but the specific warmth of a parent watching their child do something that is entirely characteristic of them. She noted it. He had said it simply, on the phone, and she had agreed simply, and neither of them had discussed it further until the morning Iris asked the question. That evening, after Iris was in bed, in the second bedroom that Vivienne had arranged to have repainted pale yellow because Margot had mentioned, on a practical note, that children often felt more settled in spaces that had been prepared with them in mind, Thomas was in the kitchen making tea, and Vivienne was at the table with a document she was not reading, and she said, She asked me this morning if we were pretending. He did not turn immediately from the kettle. I know, he said. She told me. What did you say? He turned. He brought both cups to the table and set one in front of her with the same ease with which he did everything domestic, as if it were simply the obvious thing and required no comment. I told her that some situations are complicated, he said. And that complicated doesn't mean dishonest. And that you and I had an agreement that was real, even if it was unusual. Vivienne looked at the cup. Is that true? She said. The agreement is real, he said. The documentation is real. The reason you need it is real. He sat down. I didn't tell her it was a love story. I told her it was real. Those aren't the same thing. She held that for a moment. She said we talk like we're being careful, Vivienne said. We are being careful, he said. Does that bother you? He looked at his tea. It's accurate, he said. I'm more bothered by inaccuracy than by what's being accurately described. She looked at him. He was, she had found over 3 mornings, deeply resistant to performing things. He cooked in the evenings because someone needed to and he was better at it. He asked her questions when he was curious and did not ask them when he wasn't. He said what he thought without the social padding that most people layered around their thoughts, not from rudeness but from a kind of economy. As if he had decided long ago that words had a specific cost and he was not going to spend them on things he didn't mean. It was, she found, both clarifying and slightly exposing. She's going to keep asking, Vivienne said. Yes, he said. She asks everything. She asked her teacher last year why the school day ended at a time that wasn't a round number. What did the teacher say? She said she didn't know. Iris filed a report with the headmistress. Vivienne looked at him. She was 6, he said. She had been 6 for 3 weeks. Something happened in Vivienne's face. Not the controlled professional expression, something underneath it, briefly visible. What do I tell her? She said. When she asks again. Thomas looked at her steadily. The truth, he said. In the version that's appropriate for 6. You made an agreement with her father because you needed help with something difficult. The agreement is real. The people in it are real. He paused. The rest is still being decided. She was quiet. The rest, she said. What it becomes, he said. I don't know yet. Neither do you. That's not a lie. That's just where we are. She picked up the tea. It was, she thought, the most honest thing anyone had said to her in a considerable amount of time. Edmund Ashford arrived at the first family function, a dinner at Vivienne's mother's house in the 3rd week, with the particular confidence of a man who had already decided how this was going to go. He was 48, silver-haired, with the easy authority of someone whose position in a room had always been determined by something other than what he had built. He shook Thomas's hand at the door with the assessing grip of a man taking measurements, and said something smoothly welcoming that meant nothing and was designed to mean nothing. Over dinner, he tried 3 approaches. The first was professional, asking Thomas about his work in a way designed to establish the gap between a freelance architect and the world Vivienne occupied. Thomas answered accurately and without apology. He described his current project, a residential development in the 2nd District, adaptive reuse of a former industrial building, the kind of work that required both structural precision and the particular creativity of solving constraints, with the focused brevity of someone who was interested in the work and not in whether it impressed the questioner. Edmund moved on. The second approach was historical, asking how Thomas and Vivienne had met, in the carefully casual way of someone who has done research and is checking whether the story holds. Thomas said they had been introduced through a mutual contact. Vivienne said the same. Edmund's expression did not change, but something behind it recalibrated. The third approach was Iris. He turned toward the end of the table where Iris was eating with the focused efficiency of a child who had been told there was pudding if she finished and had applied herself to the project. He addressed her with the exaggerated warmth that certain adults deploy toward children when they are trying to get something from the child's parents. "And what do you think of your new home?" he said. Iris looked at him. She chewed. She swallowed. "It's not new," she said. "We've been there for 18 days. Edmund smiled. "Of course. And do you like it there?" "Yes," Iris said. "The books are getting better." Edmund blinked. "The books?" "Vivienne didn't have many for reading books," Iris said. "The ones you read because you want to, not because you have to know the things. But we brought some of ours and she read 2 of them already." She looked at Edmund with the direct assessment she brought to people she had not yet decided about. "Did you know penguins can swim 40 miles an hour?" Edmund looked at her. "I didn't," he said. "Vivienne didn't either," Iris said. "Now she does." Edmund looked down the table at Thomas, then at Vivienne, then back at Iris with the expression of a man who had prepared for a performance and found something else in the room. Vivienne, who had not looked at Thomas throughout this exchange, was aware that his hand had moved on the table beside hers. Not touching. Just there, in the way a person is there when they are making themselves available without requiring anything of the other person. She looked at him. He was looking at his plate. But she could see the corner of his expression, and what she saw there was the smallest possible evidence of satisfaction, not at Edmund's discomfort, but at his daughter. It was a Thursday evening, week 4. Thomas was at a site meeting that had run late, and Vivienne had come home. She had stopped correcting the word home in her mind 2 weeks ago, at 6:30 to find Iris in the living room with a book and a patience that impressed her. The nanny, a woman named Claire who covered the gap between school and Thomas's return, had just left. Vivienne made tea. She had learned how Thomas made it, which was the only version she now found acceptable, and brought a second cup to the living room and sat in the chair across from the sofa where Iris was reading. Iris looked up. "Dad texted," she said. "He's 20 minutes. "I know," Vivienne said. "He texted me too." Iris looked at this information. "He texts you?" "Yes." "About being late?" "About various things." Iris absorbed this. She had the particular quality of a child who processed information in real time and then asked the question that the processing produced. "Do you like him?" she said. Vivienne looked at her tea. "Yes," she said. "I do." Iris considered her words with unusual care for someone of her age. "Do you like him in the real way? Not the arrangement way?" Vivienne held the teacup. "Those might be becoming the same thing," she said. It was the most honest thing she had said to anyone in several weeks, and the fact that she had said it to a 6-year-old rather than to the relevant adult did not escape her. Iris looked at her for a moment. Then she appeared to reach a conclusion. "Okay," she said. "That's good." She returned to her book. Vivienne sat with her tea and the particular clarity of a person who has been asked a question by a child and discovered, in answering it, that they mean it. The crisis came in week 6. Edmund had been more thorough than she had expected. He had, through a solicitor she had not anticipated him retaining, filed a formal query with the estate's trustees regarding the nature of the marriage, specifically, whether it satisfied the spirit of the 11th section, which Edmund's solicitor argued required a genuine marital relationship rather than a documented legal one. The trustees had requested a review meeting. This was, Vivienne's solicitor explained, not a challenge they were likely to win on Edmund's terms. The 11th section used the word married, which was a legal state, and Thomas and Vivienne were legally married, and the documentation was correct. But the review introduced delay. And delay introduced uncertainty. And uncertainty, in the week before the transfer, was a tool Edmund was very comfortable using. Vivienne called the firm's general counsel and her 2 most senior investment directors into a meeting and told them the situation plainly. Not the arrangement, the threat. Edmund's interest in the firm, the buyer in Boston, the 412 people whose employment was contingent on the outcome. The directors, both women who had been with the firm for more than a decade, listened without interrupting. When she finished, the senior director, a woman named Claire who had worked for Vivienne's grandfather for 7 years before the handover, said, "What do you need from us?" "I need character statements," Vivienne said. "Submitted to the trustees. Confirming the relationship as genuine." Claire looked at her. "Is it?" The room was quiet. Vivienne thought about week 4, Thursday evening, Iris and the tea. She thought about Thomas's hand on the table at her mother's dinner, not touching, just there. She thought about what he had said in the kitchen on the 3rd night. The rest is still being decided. "Yes," she said. "It is." Claire nodded once. "Then we'll write them." She told him about the trustee review that evening. He listened with the focused attention he gave to structural problems, reading the whole thing before commenting on any part. When she finished he said, "What do you need me to do?" "Nothing specific," she said. "The legal team is handling the trustees. I just thought you should know." Edmund filed it to create uncertainty, he said. "Not because he expects to win." "Yes." "Does it worry you?" She looked at the table. "The delay worries me. The outcome I'm less concerned about." He was quiet for a moment. "The outcome," he said. "Not just the inheritance?" She looked up. He was watching her with the steady brown eyes that missed very little. "Not pressing. Just asking with the directness he brought to everything." "I stopped thinking about this as a transaction some time ago," she said. "I'm not sure exactly when." He held that. "Day 11, he said. "When you stayed up until midnight reading Iris's penguin book because she had mentioned penguins and you wanted to be able to answer her questions the next morning." Vivienne looked at him. "You knew about that?" "She told me," he said. "She was very pleased about it." I didn't do it for she stopped. I know why you did it, he said. That's the point. The kitchen was quiet. The city outside continued its ordinary business. Iris was asleep in the pale yellow room that had become hers in the particular way that children make rooms theirs, a row of books in order of preference, a drawing pinned above the desk, a small collection of objects on the windowsill that had meaning she had not explained and did not need to. Thomas, she said. Yes. The arrangement ends in 5 weeks. I know. When it ends, she paused, choosing the words with the care she had learned to take. I would like to ask a question. About what comes after. But I don't want to ask it before the arrangement ends, because I don't want the answer to be given inside the context of the arrangement. He looked at her for a moment. That's a very careful thing to say, he said. I'm practicing, she said. Being careful without being dishonest. Something crossed his expression that was not the careful, measured quality she had come to know, but something warmer and less managed. 5 weeks, he said. Yes. Ask it then, he said. I'll be here. The trustee review meeting was held on a Thursday morning in the offices of the estate's solicitors, a firm in a Georgian building on Pemberton Street that smelled of wood polish and careful decisions. Edmund was there, with his solicitor. Vivienne was there, with hers. Thomas was there because she had asked him if he would come and he had said yes without asking what it would involve. The trustees were 3, an older man named Gerald who had served the estate since her grandfather's time, a woman named and who was a family friend and corporate lawyer, and a third man, younger, who had been appointed 2 years ago and whose role was primarily to provide a contemporary perspective. The meeting was formal in the way of proceedings that are being conducted with the awareness that they may be contested afterward. Statements were read. Documentation was reviewed. Edmund's solicitor presented the argument that the spirit of the 11th section required demonstrated mutual commitment rather than legal formality. Vivienne's solicitor addressed this clearly and with good evidence. Then Gerald, who had been listening with the unhurried patience of someone who had sat in many rooms where people said things they needed to be seen to have said, looked at Thomas over his glasses. Mr. Hartwell, he said, I have one question for you. Not a legal question. Simply a question. Thomas looked at him. All right. Why did you agree to this arrangement? The room was quiet in the specific way of rooms where everyone is listening. Thomas did not answer immediately. He was, Vivienne had learned, a man who gave questions the time they deserved. I agreed because I needed the financial stability and because the cause was legitimate, he said. That was why I agreed at the beginning. Gerald waited. I stayed, Thomas said, because my daughter made herself at home, and because the woman I was helping turned out to be someone worth knowing, and because some things that start as arrangements become something else before anyone decides they should. He paused. I don't know how to make that sound less simple than it is, he said. It's simply what happened. Edmund's solicitor tried to interject. Gerald held up a hand. He looked at Vivienne. And you, Miss Ashford? Vivienne held his gaze. I hired someone I could trust, she said. I found out that trust, over time, is not the same as distance. And I stopped keeping the distance. Gerald looked at Anne. And looked at the younger trustee. The younger trustee said, quietly, I think we have what we need. Her 34th birthday was on a Saturday. She had not planned anything. She was not, generally, a person who marked her birthday with intention. It was a date that arrived, required acknowledgement, and passed. She came downstairs at 8 to find the kitchen different. There were flowers on the table, not arranged formally, just a bunch of something yellow and uncereus that had clearly been chosen by someone who thought yellow was the right call. There was coffee already made. There was a card propped against the coffee cup. The card was handmade. Crayon on paper, folded once, with a drawing on the front that appeared to be a person with dark hair standing next to a bookshelf. The person was labeled Vivienne in careful capital letters. Beside the bookshelf was a smaller figure labeled Me, which was Iris. And beside Iris was a slightly taller figure labeled Dad. Inside, in the same careful capitals, Happy Birthday. We are glad you exist. Iris and Dad. The and Dad was in different handwriting. Not capitals. Just his ordinary handwriting, slightly slanted, the handwriting of a man who wrote things quickly when he meant them. Vivienne stood at the kitchen counter and looked at the card for longer than she had stood still in a considerable time. Iris appeared in the doorway. Do you like it? She said. I did the drawing. Dad wrote the inside part, but I told him what to say. What did you tell him to say? That we're glad you exist, Iris said, with the complete certainty of someone who sees no need to elaborate on a self-evident truth. Thomas appeared behind Iris, a tea towel over his shoulder, with the expression of a man who has been waiting to see how this landed. Vivienne looked at him. She had 5 weeks left. The question she was not yet asking was 5 weeks away. She looked at the card again. Ed and Dad in his handwriting. Thank you, she said. She said it to both of them. To neither of them specifically. To the kitchen and the yellow flowers and the coffee that was already made and the card with the crayon drawing that was now, she had already decided, going somewhere permanent. The arrangement technically ran until day 77, which was the day after the controlling interest transferred, cleanly, without contest, Edmund having withdrawn his challenge 3 days after the trustee meeting with the particular quiet of a man who has understood the room. On day 77, Vivienne came home at 6. Thomas was in the kitchen. Iris was at the table with the migratory bird book she had started on the 3rd morning and had been reading in increments since. Vivienne set down her bag. The transfer completed, she said. I know, Thomas said. Margot sent a message. The arrangement is concluded, she said. He turned from the counter. Yes, he said. She looked at him. She had been practicing this. Not the words, the being present for the words, which was different. The willingness to say the thing in the room where the thing needed to be said. I have a question, she said. He waited. I would like to ask whether, she stopped. Started again. I would like to ask whether you would want to stay. Not as an arrangement. Not with documentation or terms or a timeline. Simply as a question between two people who have spent 11 weeks finding out whether they mean what they appear to mean. The kitchen was quiet. Iris did not look up from the migratory birds. But she had turned a page without reading it, which was the tell. Thomas looked at Vivienne for a moment. Yes, he said. No qualification. No revision. Just the accurate answer. Vivienne held it. Yes, she repeated. Not a question. Yes, he said. Iris turned the page again. This one she read. The yellow flowers from the birthday were still on the table. She had replaced them twice when they had wilted, which she had not told anyone she was doing. The card was on the shelf in her office, beside a framed photograph of her grandfather, which she had also not told anyone, though Margot had noticed and not said anything. Because Margot noticed everything and knew when saying things was not the point. Outside, the city continued. 412 people went home from work that evening not knowing that anything had changed, because nothing had changed for them except that the thing that might have changed had not. Thomas poured 2 glasses of wine. He put one in front of her and kept one for himself and sat down at the table in the chair that had become his chair over 11 weeks of evenings. Iris looked up. Can we have pasta? She said. The from-scratch kind. Yes, Thomas said. She returned to the birds. Vivienne looked at the glass. She looked at the flowers. She looked at the man across from her who had signed an agreement and refused to pretend in front of his daughter and had turned out, over 77 days, to be exactly what he appeared to be, which was rarer than any inheritance and considerably more permanent. She picked up the glass. The from-scratch kind, she said, to no one in particular. It's better, Iris said, without looking up. I know, Vivienne said. She did know. She had learned that over 11 weeks, along with penguins, migratory birds, the correct way to make tea, and the specific value of being in a room with people who do not require you to perform being in a room with them. Some things that start as arrangements become something else. Iris had said as much on the third morning, without knowing she had said it. You talk like you're being careful. They had stopped being careful sometime around week 4. Neither of them had noted the exact moment. It hadn't needed noting. Some things that begin as arrangements become something else. The question is not how they begin. The question is what you choose when the arrangement gives you an exit and you realize you do not want to use it.